Dean Cain, the living, breathing embodiment of one of those not you memes, has made headlines a few times over the past year or so for his outspoken support of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE. He even joined ICE as an honorary agent to show his support because he felt like those poor, hardworking officers doing their duty as part of ICE and the similar but distinct U.S. Customs and Border Patrol were being treated really unfairly. Kane's solidarity with ICE has not wavered in light of recent events, namely the agency's violent occupation of the city of Minneapolis, which has resulted in the murder of two civilians, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, at the hands of ICE agents, as well as comparatively lesser scandals, like the arrest and detention of Adrian Arias and his 5-year-old son Liam, who were released and returned home last week following a court order. Speaking to TMZ, one of the few media outlets which would consider interviewing the guy who was fourth on the call sheet for God's Not Dead a good use of time in this context, or any context, really, Cain did what most people who are defending ICE in the case of the Alex Preddy shooting are doing: blamed the guy who got shot.
How many times had he had communication with law enforcement and officers before that moment? Why was he standing in the street? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. He may have been impeding. He may have become himself a target just for standing in front of. Maybe he was standing in front of ICE vehicles. I don't know.
They pepper sprayed him and disarmed him before they shot him, Dean. What the fuck does it matter what his previous communication had been with law enforcement at that point, Dean? Why are you so full of excuses for federal agents who did a murder in public? Dean! Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up at all is because out of his whole 40-plus year acting career, which has included roles in such timeless classics as Future Sport, The Perfect Husband, The Lacey Peterson Story, and The Dog Who Saved Christmas franchise, Dean Cain is best known for having played Superman on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, which is the main reason why so many of us, when we heard that Dean Cain had become a Trump-loving bootlicker and tireless cheerleader for a fascist goon squad, reacted with a simultaneously disappointed and baffled, "What the fuck?" Now, I'm not going to go into how it feels weird for an actor who once played Superman a lot to turn out to be anti-immigrant when the story of Superman is not only an allegory for the immigrant experience, but also Superman is literally an immigrant within that story, because that ground has been well covered. I've even talked about it myself in previous videos, and also, I don't need to center this video on an immigrant-themed reading of the overall myth of Superman, because there are obvious pro-immigrant themes in Lois and Clark, the show where Dean Cain plays Superman. It's not just weird that Dean Cain is simping for xenophobes because he played Superman, and Superman is just kind of generally perceived as promoting a positive view of immigrants. It's weird because Dean Cain played Superman in multiple episodes where immigrants are portrayed sympathetically as people from whom society has nothing to fear, and where those who vilify and persecute immigrants are the bad guys. Early in season 1 of Lois and Clark, there's an episode called Strange Visitor from Another Planet, in which the villain, Jason Trask, is a government agent who tries to force Lois Lane and Clark Kent to help him find Superman. Trask is convinced Superman is a threat to the security of the United States and the world, and seems willing to stop at nothing in order to capture and destroy him. Watching the episode today, the parallels to the present moment are striking. The first scene depicts a gang of armed federal law enforcement officers, led by the overbearing Trask himself, storming into the newsroom of the Daily Planet and demanding that everyone step away from their desks. Trask announces that he's here for Lois and Clark to compel them to offer testimony, to tell him what they know about Superman. A squad of federally empowered thugs storming a business in search of someone they regard as an illegal alien? If this show were being made today instead of in 1993, this would be an ICE raid. Well, mostly. The agents aren't masked. Trask does actually have a judicial warrant, and when confronted, the boss at the newspaper at least tries to stand up for his reporters instead of immediately rolling over for the authorities. So the parallels aren't perfect, But it's a fantasy, cut him some slack. What follows that first scene is about 40 minutes of mostly light-hearted shenanigans, typical of Lois and Clark and action-adventure shows like it. Our intrepid reporters investigate Trask, trying to find out who he is and who he works for. There's a lot of UFO stuff. Hey, it was the 1990s. Half the shows on TV were about UFOs. Clark discovers that Trask has stolen the rocket that carried him to Earth from Krypton. Trask captures Clark and Lois and attempts to use them to draw Superman out by chucking them out of an airplane. If you haven't seen the episode, you can probably guess how that one works out. And eventually, when Lois and Clark are on the brink of writing a story to expose Trask's activities, Trask and all the evidence of what he's been up to disappears. Through the course of the episode, Trask is revealed to be a paranoid extremist. He is convinced Superman is a threat to the world simply because Superman is an alien. There is no evidence to support Trask's conclusion, and it's clear that no evidence to the contrary could ever change his mind. He has decided that Superman is dangerous and must be destroyed, and that's all there is to it. To Trask, it's self-evident, because Trask is a bigot. A violent bigot who wields the power of the state in pursuit of his warped agenda. Does he sound like anyone you've heard of? It's okay, there's more than one correct answer. Strange Visitor from Another Planet is the second episode of the show. As in the first episode after the pilot. As in the first episode they made after the show was ordered to series. As in as soon as the producers found out they were going to get to make the show, this is the first story they wanted to tell. They chose to use their first regular episode to introduce a villain who embodied unhinged anti-immigrant hysteria. Unhinged anti-immigrant hysteria from the government. 33 years later, there's Dean Cain on TMZ talking about how if Alex Preddy didn't want to get shot, he should have stood back and let those ICE agents do their jobs. What the hell happened to this dude between 1993 and now? Was he always like this? Or did he acquire his anti-immigrant views more recently when he entered the washed-up actor to Fox News contributor pipeline? Lois and Clark's pro-immigrant, anti-xenophobia themes are present in more than just that episode. Later on in Season 1, in an episode titled The Green, Green Glow of Home, which introduces Superman's weakness, kryptonite, into the series, if you couldn't guess that from the title, Jason Trask returns, this time to target Clark Kent's hometown of Smallville, Kansas. Wayne Eyrig, a neighbor of the Kents, drops by one rainy night. Jonathan's like, "What's wrong, Wayne?" And Wayne says, "I think the smoking man knows I've been leaking information to Agent Mulder." Wait, shit, wrong one. "I found a funny rock on my farm." He shows Jonathan the rock he found, and yep, that's kryptonite. They don't know that yet, though. Wayne says he sent a piece of the rock off to a lab to be tested, and then all of a sudden a bunch of government people swarmed his farm and started talking about digging it up. He doesn't trust them, and asks Jonathan to hide this mysterious green glowing rock. Clark hears about what's going on in Smallville and convinces Perry White to send him and Lois in to write a story about it. Lois, who prefers the city to the country, is not happy and spends most of the first half of the episode mocking Clark's hometown and their simple rural ways. Things proceed along predictable but entertaining lines. From there, Clark is exposed to kryptonite for the first time and temporarily loses his powers. Lois gradually warms to Smallville and learns to appreciate what the town and its population of dim-witted hicks has to offer. There are a few teases of romantic tension between Lois and Clark, and eventually it's revealed that Jason Trask is the mastermind behind the operation on Wayne Eyrig's farm because he wants that kooky space rock so he can use it to kill Superman. Trask is defeated, killed actually. Clark's old friend Rachel, who is now the sheriff, shoots Trask as Trask is about to shoot Clark. Lois writes the story, they give the green space rock its name, kryptonite, and everyone lives happily ever after. Once again, Superman, the immigrant, the illegal immigrant, if you must, is presented as the hero who is being wrongfully targeted, and Trask, the xenophobe, is portrayed as a zealot who is misusing government power to persecute an alien who has presented no actual threat simply because he's an alien. Trask threatens and assaults other people, people who aren't aliens, in his pursuit of his target. When Clark confronts him at one point with the total lack of evidence for any of his claims, Trask accuses Clark of being mind-controlled by Superman. When challenged on one paranoid conspiracy theory, he retreats into another. Again, does any of this sound familiar? And yet,
I do know that law enforcement, certainly ICE and Border Patrol, have been under a tremendous amount of pressure and attacks, and they're getting tremendous abuse from what I completely believe is a 100% organized opposition.
could this be the result of red kryptonite poisoning? Or what's the color that makes your brain fall out? Somebody needs to go through Dean's pockets and find that kryptonite crack pipe he's been hitting. I'm kidding, of course. All colors of kryptonite are just make pretend, and there is no excuse for Dean Cain. Superman was just a role. I realize that. Just because an actor plays a character, that doesn't mean the actor agrees with everything that character does and says and believes. Carol O'Connor played bigoted right-wing blowhard Archie Bunker on TV for 12 years. But O'Connor himself was an outspoken liberal who supported many progressive causes throughout his life. If we can accept that a tolerant person can play a character with intolerant beliefs, why is it so unsettling to encounter the opposite of that? Why does it bother me that Dean Cain could play Superman on TV for 4 years and end up like this? Maybe because Superman is not merely a righteous character, his point of view is validated by the show. In the Archie Bunker example, even though Archie is the lead character of All in the Family and Archie Bunker's Place, the audience is meant to laugh at his bigotry, not agree with it. Superman, on the other hand, is presented as being in the right most, if not all, of the time, and the character is clearly intended to be a role model. Did Dean Cain just not get it? Did he somehow play this character in almost 90 total hours of television and fail to internalize any of his virtues? If that is what happened, it is rendered even more baffling by the additional fact that Dean Cain not only played Superman and Lois and Clark, he also wrote for the show. He is the credited writer on 2 episodes. Season 2's Christmas episode, Season's Greetings, which guest stars Sherman Hemsley and Isabel Sanford. Bet you never expected to get a Jeffersons reunion in a Superman show, did ya? And Season 3's Virtually Destroyed, where Lois and Clark are trapped inside a virtual reality simulation. Remember how popular of a trope virtual reality was in 1990s TV? There's even a VR episode of Murder, She Wrote. Anyway, while I wouldn't rank either of the episodes Dean Cain wrote among the best of the series, they're both pretty good. At the very least, not terrible. He clearly understood the show at a level beyond that of an actor merely learning his lines and giving an appropriate performance. But that much would have been obvious even if he hadn't written for the show. I feel like I need to stress this, not to minimize his current status as MAGA man, but to emphasize how wrong it feels. Dean Cain was a great Superman. The Lois and Clark version of Superman was more of an everyman than the Christopher Reeve version had been. Here, Clark is clearly the dominant half of the dual identity, the real guy, as opposed to a manufactured persona. And the focus of the series is more on romance and lighthearted hijinks than superheroics, especially early on. But this Superman is everything anyone who grew up reading Superman comics or watching the old George Reeves TV show or the Christopher Reeve movies would expect him to be. Selfless, honest, except for the secret identity bit, someone who uses his strength to help those in need and to protect the weak and the vulnerable. A hero who truly does fight for truth and justice. He stands against thugs like Jason Trask, not side by side with them. And yet,
he certainly wasn't there just being a peaceful protester, and it was a very bad idea to engage physically with federal law enforcement while armed. He's standing between law enforcement officers and that woman. That's a mistake in its own right, and doing it while armed is a bad bad idea.
For me, the most unsettling thing about the fact that the guy who played Superman on TV when I was a teenager is now a Trump supporter and ICE defender is the reminder that this could happen to any one of us if we aren't careful. Dean Cain's not someone who played a hero on TV and then chose to be a villain in real life. He thinks he's been the hero all along. He sees his views on immigrants as entirely reasonable and probably even considers them compatible with the Superman character he played. If the present day Dean Cain wrote one of those Jason Trask episodes of Lois and Clark, it'd probably go something like this. I can't stand a man like Trask, chasing after me when he should be using his resources to catch and deport the real threat, the millions of undocumented immigrants in this country. But Superman, aren't you an immigrant? Yes, Lois, but I didn't sneak across the border like some common criminal. I entered the United States the right way, by crashing into it with a spaceship. Nothing hypocritical about that. On the subject of hypocrisy, Dean Cain has Japanese ancestry, and in an interview last year with Variety, recalled being labeled Sushi Man by a disgruntled fan when he was first cast as Superman. That was back in the 1990s. If Dean Cain were cast as Superman today, many of the same people who he is siding with against immigrants would be calling for his head and decrying him as a DEI hire and an example of wokeism run amok. Just saying. In that same Variety interview, he mentions that his own family was taken to an internment camp for Japanese Americans during World War II, which he describes as a horrible injustice before adding, "But I don't think I deserve any sort of reparations." I mean, whether or not you think you're owed reparations for what was done to your family, at the very least, could you not actively side with the people who are doing that same kind of thing to other families right now? And I know the response to that argument would probably be something like, hey, it's not the same. My family came to this country legally. They became citizens. And ICE is going after criminals who came here illegally. But the problem with that, other than the way it bloodlessly chooses legalism over humanity, is that most of the people being arrested, detained, deported, and in some cases assaulted and murdered by ICE are not criminals. Some of them aren't even immigrants. And as for the ones who are, the overwhelming majority of immigrants in this country, documented and undocumented, are not threats to their communities. They aren't murderers and rapists and drug dealers. They work, they pay taxes. Many of them have lived in this country for decades. To paraphrase another Superman, Dean, they're just as American as you are. They love, they get scared, they screw up all the time, but they get up every morning and put one foot in front of the other because that is being human. How can Superman join ICE is the question I always ask myself whenever Dean Cain opens his mouth and says something abhorrent in defense of Trump's Gestapo. But I know the answer to that question is that Superman didn't join ICE. A guy who played Superman when I was a kid did. That still sucks. By the way, the second episode of Lois and Clark Dean Cain wrote, the virtual reality one, the previous episode to that one was called Superman, and it's about Superman fighting to prevent a new generation of Nazis from taking control of the United States. I hesitate to paraphrase another character from another superhero movie so soon, but I guess I have to, because Dean Cain proves that Harvey Dent was right. You either die playing a hero who fights the Nazis, or you live long enough to join them.